In 2022, something strange happened. The United States didn't send soldiers, it didn't launch missiles, it didn't even close borders. Instead, it pressed a financial button. And within days, one of the largest economies on Earth suddenly struggled to buy basic things from the rest of the world. Not because factories disappeared, not because the country ran out of money, but because it ran out of dollars. This is the uncomfortable truth most people never think about. The global economy runs on a currency that belongs to just one country, the US dollar. And whether you live in Brazil, Germany, India, or Indonesia, your economy is quietly tied to it. So the real question is not why is the dollar important? The real question is this: why does the entire world depend on a currency printed by a single government? To understand that, we need to go back in time, right after World War II. In 1944, the world's financial system was a mess. Europe was destroyed. Currencies were unstable. Trade was chaotic. So 44 countries gathered in a small town called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. Their mission was simple: build a new global financial system that wouldn't collapse again. The solution they came up with was surprisingly simple. Every major currency would be tied to the US dollar, and the dollar would be tied to gold. At the time, the United States held about 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, so the deal sounded reasonable. Countries could trade with confidence, currencies would stay stable, and the dollar would act as the center of the system. For a while, it worked beautifully. Global trade exploded, economies rebuilt, and the dollar slowly became the language of international money. But then something unexpected happened. In 1971, the United States quietly broke the system. President Richard Nixon announced that the dollar would no longer be backed by gold. In other words, the world's most important currency was now backed by nothing but trust. Normally, that should have destroyed confidence, but instead, the opposite happened. The dollar became even more powerful. And here's where things get interesting. Today, most global trade is still priced in dollars: oil, natural gas, wheat, gold, copper. Even if two countries are trading with each other, say Brazil and South Korea, the deal is often calculated in dollars, not in Brazilian reais, not in Korean won. Dollars. Which means both countries first need to get dollars before they can trade. Imagine trying to play a global game where the official scorecard is owned by someone else. That's essentially the dollar system. But how does the world actually get these dollars? Through the U.S. financial system. When the U.S. runs trade deficits, importing more than it exports, dollars flow out into the world. Those dollars then circulate through global banks, corporations, and governments. And here's the irony. The United States can spend dollars into the world, while the rest of the world has to earn them, which creates a strange global loop. Countries export goods to the United States. They receive dollars, then they often reinvest those dollars back into the United States, usually by buying U.S. government bonds. Right now, foreign governments hold trillions of dollars in U.S. Treasury debt. China, Japan, European countries. They are essentially lending money back to the country that created the currency. If that sounds a little absurd, that's because it is. But the system keeps working for one simple reason: trust. The United States has the largest economy in the world, the deepest financial markets, and a relatively stable political system, so investors assume the dollar will remain safe. And safety is everything in global finance. When uncertainty rises, money doesn't run away from the dollar, it runs toward it. During the 2008 financial crisis, which started in the United States, global investors rushed into dollars. During the COVID market panic, same thing. The system is so entrenched that even when the source of the problem is America, the dollar still wins. But this dominance creates enormous hidden power, because controlling the currency that powers global trade means controlling access to the system itself. Remember the event we mentioned at the beginning, when the United States froze Russia's access to much of the global financial network in 2022? Russian banks suddenly couldn't use dollar-based systems. Foreign reserves were locked, trade became dramatically harder. Not impossible, but slower, riskier, and more expensive. That moment sent a quiet signal to the rest of the world. The global economy may be interconnected, but the plumbing still runs through Washington and New York. And that realization has triggered a growing question among many countries. What happens if we build alternatives? China is pushing international trade in its own currency. Some countries are experimenting with non-dollar payment systems. Others are buying massive amounts of gold, not because the dollar is collapsing tomorrow, but because relying on a single country's currency carries risk. And the math behind the system is getting heavier. Global debt has exploded past $300 trillion. Much of it is tied to dollar financing. When U.S. interest rates rise, borrowing costs rise everywhere. A decision made by the Federal Reserve in Washington can tighten financial conditions in dozens of countries overnight, which means a domestic policy decision inside one nation can ripple through the entire global economy. That level of influence is rare in history. Empires used to control trade with ships and armies. Today, a large part of that control flows through financial networks and currencies, and the dollar sits at the center of it all. But here's the strange part. For the system to survive, the world needs dollars, which means the United States needs to supply them, often by running deficits. In other words, the currency that dominates the global economy depends on the country issuing it constantly spending more than it earns. It's a delicate balance. Too many dollars and confidence could weaken. Too few dollars and global trade slows down. So the system continues, slightly unstable, but still functional. A financial architecture built nearly 85 years ago. But history has a pattern. No global reserve currency lasts forever. The Dutch guilder dominated trade in the 1600s. Then the British pound ruled the